Thank you. Sorry, I don't know what was going on with the link, but I'm here now.
So many problems. Hey, we're going to jump right into it. Caleb, I want to just start very quickly. You give us a very dark message and complicated message. Would you tell us just a little bit more about how you came to this understanding, your process of coming to this dark place?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want it to only be a dark feeling of takeaway, because I do think there's a lot of potential for um, changing things and organizing and making things better. And I think that when certain institutions and whatnot are collapsing in certain ways, that's actually the point where more positive transformations actually have a possibility of occurring. So it's not
Okay.
just dark, even though it is a dark time. But how I came to these thoughts, I mean, it's a combination of a lot of my time researching the researching and working within the mental health system, but also just being a human in the world and traveling and having a lot of interesting conversations with people, but trying to deeply understand how we got to the point we're at in history. Um, and not seeing the mental health system as something disconnected from all of the other social, political, economic institutions that shape it. Yeah, in
Okay.
brief.
So we have a question from one of the attendees, Samitra, and she asks, where have you received the most pushback when you've discussed or written about this subject?
Um, the most pushback,
Who
I
objects
think.
most mightily to your theories and your idea?
Um, I honestly like it. It's pushback comes when I or others are pushing the actual rules or boundaries of the institution itself, um, where I actually am finding quite often that most people um, share similar feelings, even if they maybe haven't spent as much time articulating them. But like, I'll have certain people or supervisors or whatnot within an institutional setting saying, you can't say this or that because of X, Y, or Z. And then on the side being like, well, although I agree with what you're saying. So I feel like a lot of the pushback is actually just these sort of institutional limits that are imposed upon us. And then I think you would find that maybe more people than not um, share at least certain common frustrations, even if they're maybe not articulated in the same way. Um, but with that being said, I guess I surround myself with people that are trying to push the system to be better. And I find, yeah, I guess maybe the most amount of pushback in conversations with psychiatrists as opposed to other
Hmm.
workers within the mental health system. Um, yeah, I'll leave that there.
Well, this idea that psychosis is sort of an outgrowth of the social ecology, the environment,
Hmm.
is was very much promulgated by psychiatrists in the 1970s as they were sort of pushing against this biomedical model and saying, okay,
Hmm.
it's nurture, not nature. So you see these new psychiatrists today as being dismissive of the idea that the environment has the social, the political, the economic, environmental environment has an effect, and that psychosis and mental illness perhaps is a response to that experience.
Yeah. And again, it's not all psychiatrists. I know some great psychiatrists as well that think similarly. Just that's sort of a broad stroke, which in my mind has to do with sort of the biomedical takeover of our institutions, our education and whatnot with DSM-3, and then the privatization of a lot of healthcare, the rise of the importance of the pharmaceutical industry's power to sort of determine what even gets in our education and textbooks and whatnot, um, and the way in which more depth-oriented models of the psyche have been increasingly pushed aside, um, and really trying to understand and work with what we call severe mental illness being increasingly relegated to psychiatry, and psychiatry specifically in a biologically understood way of thinking, even though historically psychiatry is not only focused on the body, but on alienation
Mm.
at its very earliest conception.
We have a couple of questions. A lot of the attendees here are very practical people. A couple of questions that came a little earlier about how do you fit these ideas into the day-to-day of mobile crisis? And you've worked on a mobile crisis team.
Yeah.
And I'm going to paraphrase Kelly Fox Gonzalez's question. Um, for programs that are embedded, or I'll read it, for programs that are embedded in a municipal budget, what are your thoughts on how to fight austerity without succumbing to the incentive to produce data about good outcomes, which are very
Mhm.
difficult under this current system?
Yeah. Um, I mean, that's a great question, something that we should be talking about. I think, I mean, in my own work, a lot of what I'm doing is just prioritizing. Um, well, on the one hand, sort of in the actual work and interventions that we're doing and whatnot, sort of keeping what is demanded by the institution in mind, of knowing what sort of needs to be acquired at minimum for the institution, and keeping that in the back of my head while sort of trying to forefront what are the actual immediate concerns of this patient, and how can we as a team best sort of deepen their experience and their understanding of their experience and slow things down. Um, and then, when it comes to the needs of the institution, trying to fill as much of that in as possible as an afterthought rather than as what is most important in an intervention. But then I guess you're asking some bigger, longer term strategies, I think, for change. But the number one thing is, I think, just talking with all of the other mental health workers within your city, within your hospital, or whatever you're working, trying to create a more unified body of mental health workers. This is something I'm talking with lots of mental health workers in New York about, how we can come together, create some sort of city um, municipal mental health workers network, or council, or something that can go on to inform the city administration or the whatever health institutions we have, because right now there's no direct line, at least in New York, between the actual people doing the work and the people that are making the decisions about how this work should be done. And that just sort of changes according to the whims of various politicians and whatnot, and city budgets, rather than the people doing the work. So obviously, we would also have to take into account budgets and whatnot, but we can't fight for better budgets or more rational designs of the mental health system if we're not first and foremost um, have some form of body for mental health workers to democratically make decisions about our own care. Uh, yeah, I don't know if that addressed that, but
It's a tough sell. It's a that's we got a lot of work to do to get to that point. You
yes.
used a couple of terms in your talk that were a little obscure to me, and I wonder if you t explain psychoticizing. What do you mean by that? Could you unpack that for me?
hmm Um, yeah, I mean, I think of a psychoticizing condition as one in which um, the the person or the subject in that situation is undergoing an experience of essentially being turned into an object to be used by others. Um, that's sort of the condition on the level of lived experience, this sense of it's not your desires or your life drives that are being facilitated. You're not doing what you want. You are your own life drives, your desires, your energy is being subordinated to the demands or desires of others that are seen as more powerful, or they're not subject to lack themselves. They're not subject to law. So you have this condition of this sort of lived experience of exploitation, but then that's combined on the symbolic level, the level of language, culture, and speech, with a sort of denial or a lack of an ability to represent or symbolize that experience of exploitation. So on the level of lived experience, it's of you being turned into an object for more powerful others, combined on the symbolic level with a denial of that experience, or with a lack of ability to separate and make rational sense of that experience of exploitation. So a sort of psychoticizing condition for both an individual and for the social body as a whole is one of sort of exploitation, and then a lack of symbolic frameworks or ways of making sense of that process. And that sort of contributes to this possibility of fragmentation, breakdown, and whatnot that we understand it as psychosis.
Now, in the mobile crisis experience, we're spending an hour at most with people, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, to untangle the double bind that a person might be in their life. It's going to take a little more time than that. What's the
Mhm.
strategy there for a mobile crisis worker to begin to address this kind of issue?
Um, we have a lot of limits in this country just by how we're set up. I mean, I would like to fight more for a model of crisis work based in the sort of open dialogue style that's been pioneered in Finland and I think also Germany, uh, where somebody is actually that the team is of crisis workers are actually seeing that person through their crisis with the intention of making sense of the symptoms, extracting meaning and knowledge from those symptoms, and including everyone in that person's this sort of most important people in that person's network. And there's a lot of um, difficulties with translating that in America, one being the managed care system of insurance, and but also um, at least in New York City, how crisis work is split up between different teams, and it's all very short-term assessment focused. Um, but that is exactly what I have a problem with, is the way in which we foreground this quick assessment and then trying to quickly connect them elsewhere. And it's not really doing, it's not helping the crisis. It's just passing the crisis along into another fragmented part of the institutional circuit where they're may or may not be connected with something that's going to be more emancipatory for them. It could be something like just getting them back into another place that's going to sort of fail them. You have to have hope that it's going to be something more positive for them. But I think, yeah, as different cities in the US should be thinking about how to be able to transform crisis work, to be able to do a little bit more long-term work, seeing that person for longer, maybe even while crisis work has already connected them with outpatient care, maybe they're also still coming and meeting with the patient and their network at home for a longer period of time. Um, I'm not sure exactly how it would work in the States, but it's something we need to be talking about because crisis work
Right.
is not doing enough right now.
Right, right. And I don't know of any examples of open dialogue being done here in the US, and precisely because of the payment problem that you described. The purpose of this conference, as well as discussing peer engagement in the workforce, is to, as peers enter the workforce, we sort of shift our perspective of the work from that of the institution, of the guilds, to people who have a little bit more ground experience.
Hmm.
And so, we're not going to come up with practical solutions along the way here, but we certainly are going to look into the future and see what's possible.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, also, it's such an interesting point of connection where the crisis team is going and meeting with somebody at this point of crisis where it is a rupture in that person's life. It's also just generally a social rupture. And with that rupture comes this opportunity for um, ushering in a new form of encounter, a new way of being in the world, a new way of connecting with other people. And so much of our work is sort of dependent upon what can we actually make of that experience and what can we then usher in afterwards. So I feel like crisis teams around the state should be thinking about what sort of community links we can be making, bypassing just the sort of official mental health institutions to what are things more like clubhouses or even just local art centers, things where people can go and get connected with other people doing meaningful things, because that's where people are going to change is in those relationships and those activities that inspire a sense of beauty, a sense of connection, um, rather than exclusively plugging them back into a sort of individualizing biological focused treatment.
Well, that's certainly what was mobile crisis for the first decade or so. It was, let's round up these strays and bring them back into the corral so we can restart our community mental health process with them. But you're
Mhm.
saying that perhaps one of the missions of mobile crisis should be system navigators and to be listening to the identified client and say, what do I hear your real needs being? Maybe it's midnight basketball. Maybe it's a stop smoking class. Maybe it's something other than community mental health.
Mhm. Yeah.
If folks have questions for Caleb Scott, now's the time to ask them in the Q&A. He's here for a few more minutes and we'll be able to ask your questions of him and get answers. Uh, so if you do have a question, pop that right into the Q&A. Caleb, we did a video together a couple of weeks ago where you talked about
Mhm.
the conflict of identifying that the crisis is what we need to attend to. That mobile crisis work is maybe sends us in the wrong direction just by saying those words. Let's talk a little bit about crisis and sort of understanding it, the etology of crisis a little bit better.
Um, yeah. I mean, I think there were also a couple maybe questions in the chat, but
Oh, sure.
I
If you'd
mean,
like to address any of those, that'd be better.
just briefly on the crisis, I mean, it just is important that we think about the crisis not just as somebody's um, individual crisis, but that we're dealing with multiple crises, and that all of these mental health crises that we individualize are also, you know, um, sort of aspects of our broader social crisis. But I'm looking at the chat here. I don't know what's been. Do you have do you have
Jordan
examples of
asks,
cities? Yeah.
let me read it into the so people can hear it later in the recorded version. This is Jordan Margolis asking, what are some examples we can look to of, quote, holistic transformative mental health systems based on principles of libertarian municipalism? And this is a quote from your summary statement in the program.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I don't know if this is something that has been fully fleshed out anywhere. But I do think there's different places we can look for different inspiring. things happening. I mean, I think generally across the sort of democratic psychiatry movement in in Italy, it was something that's been inspiring to me when they were trying to sort of, this was in the 60s and 70s, trying to sort of get people out of the state asylums. They put a lot of attention and focus into organizing mental health workers alongside um, mental health patients to come together in assemblies to talk about what sort of care they wanted to create in the community. Uh, and so that's something that was inspiring to me because it was a movement where you saw, people coming together, patients and doctors and politicians to try to come up with a better way of doing care in the community. Um, but I don't think there's anything currently existing that is sort of as systematic as what I would love to see. But everywhere, I think there are small groups doing different things that are inspiring. It's sort of about how we can sort of bring all of these together to um, make something more longer lasting and that could actually be funded by the city.
Caleb, Darcy from Atlanta asks about peer support specialists and peer specialists working in mobile crisis. And her question is about certification, which we're not going to really address in this session. But how have you been inspired by the development of the peer movement in mobile crisis?
Um, I think generally the peer movement is and has been inspiring to me. What is unfortunate is I feel like what a limited role they're actually given in so many of our programs. I think, yeah, I mean, starting really also in the 60s and 70s, the growth of um, various peer or patient psychiatry survivor movements and people with lived experience starting clubhouses. Like these are really serious, helpful interventions. The way that they have um, gone through the mental health system, come out of it, survived it, and are coming up with new ways of supporting one another and really zeroing in on what is actually going on, how the person is feeling, making sense of their experience. But then when it comes to, it you see a lot of peer support specialists brought on to like mobile crisis teams and whatnot. But often I feel like they're still relegated to a sort of um, more administrative role or after the fact piece of it. And that's something that I think partially happens because so much of the institutional focus is on making, clinical assessments that you need to get all of this information and then determine what to do with them. So it's still so biomedically and assessment oriented and short term, and you're supposed to do the interventions in such a short amount of time that the person that has all this experience, um, I feel like I've seen them get sidelined in the process of the crisis work. Um,
I want
yeah.
to jump in and invite Shireen into the conversation. Shireen has recently been to Trieste and been able
Oh,
to
very
see
cool.
something about the psychiatric services there. Shireen, are you able to come into the meeting? And while Shireen is coming, uh, Amir, are we going to be able to get Shireen into the conversation?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I love it when technology works. So yes, I had the wonderful opportunity of going to Trieste November of last year. And I will tell you, I went as a skeptic. You hear and if you look it up, you will see that Trieste is the best place in the world to have mental illness, and you'll see articles and all of these things. And a small group of people were curated to go last November. And so I went as somebody who has lived living and shared experience. I have been involved in mental health systems myself for, gosh, over 4 decades. And I've worked in the US based system for 3 decades, and I operate a peer run agency in North Carolina. So I was very hopeful but skeptical when I went. And one of the things that I recognized, we can do an entire thing just about the system in Trieste and all of the things to learn from them. But one of the things that was really amazing to me is they've taken like disparate concepts of recovery that we have in pockets in the US, human rights, centric belief systems and values, different approaches, different models, and they have systematized it in a way that I have not seen done at scale like that. So literally their entire system operates from the same blueprint, the same language. They have figured out how to translate values into practice and values into funding. They have figured out how to operationalize the real things of human dignity, restoration, and preservation of human rights. They had 6 beds, 4 bedrooms in their hospital for people experiencing mental health crises, emotional distress. They were all unlocked. And when I was there, none of them were used because they believe very strongly that healing happens in community. If somebody ends up in the hospital, it has to be at their own will. If they are hospitalized against their will, which very rarely happens, there is a lot of due process and checks and balances, but they plan community reentry quickly, immediately, because they do not want people there beyond a night stay in the psych hospital. And then the last thing I'll say is their psychiatrists. I was probably surrounded by 7 different psychiatrists while I was there at different times, and they were much more like social workers, street outreach social workers. When I tell you they knew people's favorite everything from color to food, they and everybody that I met with there that was involved in their services, they described their service providers as allies. There wasn't that weird hierarchy thing that happens. And I did not get any sense. And I spent a lot of time with folks there receiving services. And it was just foreign to them that they would think of people that work with them other than allies and friends and people that they could go to for anything that they wanted. It was really an amazing system to experience.
I'm glad you got to go. I would have loved to have gotten to see that someday. It would be cool. Did you go with Sasha
Let's
Warren?
go, Caleb. No, I went with a small group of people that were curated out of California. So it was
Okay.
policymakers, it was some US based psychiatrists, some researchers with lived experience, myself. It
Yeah.
was a group of people that went. And I think actually your name came up. You might have been, I don't know. Anyways,
Yeah. Well,
I recommend,
the
yeah,
book, there's a book by John Foote. I think it's called Bisaglia, the man who something
pour down the asylums.
tore down the asylums. Yeah.
Yeah,
I would highly recommend everyone read that because it sort of details this sort of democratic psychiatry movement that culminated in what you saw in Trieste. But yeah, just it you see how much work it took in terms of actually doing that long-term work of bringing the providers together in democratic assemblies with patients and with politicians. And it was quite a struggle, and yet they did it and they did it together. We're so fragmented in America between, workers and patients who already have this big, have the, yeah, it's just everyone is fragmented, not just the care receivers and the care providers, but also the care providers and their different disciplines and different unions and different locals and different locations of care. We need to create some form of network or body that can, in each of our local areas, can actually come together and demand things. Because when we're not unified, we have no power.
that's
We're
right.
already put in a powerless position, but
That's
when
right.
we're fragmented, we have nothing.
And they've done it for decades. The only thing I will say, well, one of the things I would say is they're not as strong in peer support as we are. Peer support is emerging.
Mhm.
in their system. And we have a lot that we could teach them
Hmm.
around peer led, peer operated, peer designed, that type of real sharing of power and knowledge and wisdom. They're not as strong in that area there, but other things were pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Shireen, when you were there, I imagine it might have been very frustrating to see this occurring in this uh, Italian city, and you having to go back to the United States. Did you see things you could bring back and use immediately, or do you need a whole new
Yeah,
medical system?
yeah, we no, we it's interesting because I've had many meetings and conversations from people that are at different levels within the system since then. How do you pilot something like that in westernized medicine? I mean, frankly, that's what we're talking about. We from a worldview, philosophical belief system, we have bought into the narrative that what we label as mental illness is a brain disease, is a chemical imbalance here. And when it's a chemical imbalance, your weapons of choice are psych meds and forced entry into locked systems when somebody can't think for themselves. We see that in the policy. There, they come from a very different script. And so the question is, in the U.S. based system, can we create a system inside the system? Frankly, is where I've gone to. I know we are not going to be able to blow up even a local community. Like we have talked about it from a county perspective. How do we replicate pieces, if not all, and make it coordinated and funded differently and operate from a different narrative? Can that be done within a system? It will be very difficult because the carceral system is so strong and pharma is so strong in the United States. Could we do it as a system inside of a system, pilot it, try it out, see if it can be replicated and then scaled, at least in communities that embrace it? I have absolutely no doubt that we can figure that out, but it's going to have to be local efforts, especially given all the policy issues that we're seeing right now.
So, Caleb, with this, Charlene's brought the light to the darkness and said, this could happen. This is, even though it's far off and, we're in a sinking ship at the moment, uh, do you believe it can happen?
I do. Yeah, I fully do. And I think that it's like I was trying to say at the beginning, when when times get a little bit more desperate and chaotic, it forces people who otherwise might have been more comfortable with the system as is to be like, okay, yeah, maybe I should join this meeting where we're going to talk about how we can make things better. I mean, I know as for how many pieces of horrifying news I see and hear, there's an equal amount of things that I hear that are inspiring. And I'm at least in New York City, there's so much energy among a lot of different people doing different cool things, trying to um, make the city a better place for everybody. And I've seen a lot of inspiring things coming out of Minnesota and this year. So yeah, there's community organizing that's going on, and I think as these institutions that we've built up for so long start to sort of be pressured by budget cuts and all sorts of problems, that's our opportunity to come in and organize together around much more rational and democratic and peer-led values and ideals. And I think those can very much happen, but that's dependent upon us being more organized as mental health workers. Otherwise, it'll slip through our hands and things will just be more controlled.
It's an exciting time to be in New York and to be part of the hospital system in New York. You probably are feeling that you're on the verge of many changes.
Yeah, it is an exciting time and also nervous. Like you don't know what exactly what exactly will happen. But yeah.
Well, we may also be without a medical system fairly shortly. We have one last question, and Sally is coming in with it just to throw you a curveball about
Mhm.
reintegrating the arts as a way to readdress mental illness and institutionalization. Uh, and I think you can see the question in the Q&A. Uh, do you have any feelings about alternatives to typical mental health treatment, such as the arts, that could step in here and diversify the response?
Um, I mean, I don't know what more to say on that other than I think that we need to value value the arts more in healing, and for all of us. I mean, I think that the social order built around just production of things for the sake of profit has created a lot of ugly things and has focused our sensibility and our aesthetic perception on this surface levelness of life, the thingness, and that art actually is healing, not just of what we call mental illness, but just of our ability to, disalienate or like free our imaginative capacities to imagine new worlds in which there's more joy and love and beauty around. So I see it as, yeah, even beyond just the sort of healing of what we call mental illness, but also just like a necessity for our social um, body in general. But yeah, the more that we can facilitate art within the mental health system, as we say it, the better, I would say. So yeah, I mean, I think that keep thinking about the two big things being like more art focused work and more like socially focused work of getting people plugged into places where they can create and tap into the imagination, and also plugging people into places where they can organize in meaningful ways in their community with other members in their community, doing things around mutual aid, doing projects that are bettering where they live, not just plugging them into some low wage labor job where they're going to continue to be alienated. And it's, I think there's a fine line between the way in which there's been focus in the past on people in order to recover from mental disorders need to be in employment, but that can very quickly turn into exploitation. And I would say wage labor is always a form of exploitation. And so, it, what type of activity are people getting connected with? It should be the sort of activity that's helping to create the sort of world that we want to be moving into.
Oh, but Caleb, work will set you free.
No.
Thank you so much for talking with us and giving us your thoughts and wisdom and
Yeah.
philosophy, and best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.